The Alpha King despised his silent mate until he saw her healing his people in secret. The kingdom of Verrat lay under a cold sky, its mountains jagged like broken teeth and its forests whispering of old curses. Mist rolled over the stone streets of the capital, curling around the walls of Kalen's fortress like a living thing. From his throne, the Alpha King looked out over the city, his expression as cold as the wind that cut through the towers. Fear and respect followed him wherever he went. Strength, he believed, came from dominance. Compassion was a weakness he could not allow in himself or in anyone under his rule. Lysara moved quietly through the same streets he watched from above. Her steps were soft, but the people of Verrat knew her presence. She had a gift, a secret no one else could wield. Her hands could ease pain, heal wounds, and soothe fevered bodies. But the world had not been kind to her gift. Born silent, cursed in some way that no healer or priest could undo, she spoke not a word. The kingdom called her quiet, fragile, even useless, and the Alpha King himself despised her for it. Kalen's eyes flicked toward her chambers, where she sat beside a small brazier, her long, dark hair falling over her shoulders like a waterfall. Even sitting still, there was a weight in her presence that he could not name. She had been his mate for 3 seasons, and yet she remained a mystery, a shadow that refused to bend. Every time he tried to speak to her, she only tilted her head or offered a faint smile, and that, Kalen thought, was arrogance masquerading as silence. But tonight, Lysara was not in her chambers. The city below whispered of sickness. A plague had struck a small village near the forest's edge, carried on the wings of summer flies and the chill of the river. Families huddled in the mud, children crying, parents praying to gods that had long since turned away. Lysara had known of the suffering hours before Kalen's council had even whispered of it. She had slipped away into the night, hooded and silent, moving toward the village that needed her hands more than her voice. Kalen noticed her absence immediately. His brow furrowed, and he rose from his throne, his cloak trailing like a shadow across the cold stone floor. "Where is she?" he demanded to the captain of the guard, a tall man with armor that gleamed in torchlight. "She left again, your majesty," the captain said cautiously. "She said she was going to check on the sick in the outer villages." Kalen's jaw tightened. "Without my permission?" His voice was low, dangerous. "She risks more than her life if she is harmed, if the curse—" He stopped. No one spoke of the curse openly. It was a weight both on her and on the throne. "She is careful, sire," the captain replied. "She has saved more than one life in secret. Perhaps her way is wiser than ours." Kalen's eyes burned like coals. "Wiser? She defies my orders. She defies me." He turned abruptly and strode to the window, looking down at the misty streets where Lysara had vanished. "I will find her. I will see what she is doing in my absence." Meanwhile, Lysara navigated the forests and the muddy paths with ease. The villagers knew her approach before they saw her. Word of the silent healer had spread through whispers, through hope. A mother clutched her feverish child and cried softly when Lysara appeared, her hands glowing faintly in the dark. She knelt, brushing damp hair from the boy's forehead, murmuring prayers to herself in gestures alone. The glow from her palms eased his fever as the child's breathing slowed, the tightness leaving his chest. Even in the shadow of Kalen's wrath, Lysara moved with purpose. She had learned long ago that strength was not always in force. It could be in kindness, in quiet courage. Every wound she healed, every life she saved, was an act of defiance and hope. Yet she carried the fear in her chest, the fear that the Alpha King would discover her work and punish her, thinking her a traitor rather than a savior. Kalen followed her from a distance, cloaked in darkness, his sharp eyes tracing her movements. For the first time, he saw her not as silent or weak, but as a force in her own right. He watched her touch the child, saw the color return to his cheeks, felt something stir in him he had not named before. It was confusion, a strange ache in his chest. The same girl he despised could create life where there was despair, could hold the broken threads of his kingdom together with nothing but gentle hands. The moon rose high over the village, casting silver light on Kalen's troubled face. He wanted to call out to her to command her to stop, but the words stuck in his throat. He realized reluctantly that he was powerless here. She alone held the balance. His anger twisted with something unfamiliar, admiration, maybe even awe. Lysara finished her work with the last of the sick, her hands glowing dimly as the village quieted under the spell of healing she wove without magic spoken aloud. She moved to leave, only to see Kalen emerge from the shadowed trees. "You dare?" His voice was low, but every syllable carried the weight of the throne. His cloak flared behind him as he stepped closer, and the villagers froze in fear. "I heal," Lysara said, her hands raised slightly, though she did not speak aloud. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching. It was the first time he truly saw the fire in her, the courage that had always been masked by silence. Kalen's fists clenched. "Without my permission, you risk everything." "You risk me?" His voice thundered, but there was a tremor beneath it, one he did not understand. Lysara did not flinch. She had known his wrath, had endured it countless times in the silence of the palace, and yet she could not stop saving lives. Not for him, not for herself, but for the people who had no one else. The tension between them hung like lightning before a storm. Kalen wanted to strike, to punish her, to assert the dominance that had defined him for years. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw something he had not seen before: unwavering loyalty, fierce compassion, and a power that could not be broken. "Do you understand what you risk?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now, edged with something almost like concern. Lysara only nodded, the faintest tilt of her head. No words were needed. She had always spoken in actions, in the quiet language of the soul. Kalen turned abruptly, his anger battling with the unfamiliar stirrings in his heart. He could not deny the truth. She had saved lives tonight, lives he could not have saved even with all his strength. And the realization stung more than any insult. As he stepped back into the shadows, Kalen noticed something in the trees. A dark figure hidden among the branches, watching them both. The stranger moved silently, but the sense of threat was unmistakable. The night carried a new danger, one that neither the Alpha King nor his silent mate had anticipated. The villagers, too, felt it. A hush fell over the homes, the air thick with tension. Lysara's hands still glowed faintly from her last act of healing, and Kalen's eyes burned with questions he could not yet answer. "You will pay for this," Kalen whispered, more to himself than to her. Yet even as he spoke, he could not look away from the quiet strength that had challenged him tonight. For the first time, the Alpha King realized that his silent mate might hold a power greater than his own, and that power frightened him more than any enemy. Lysara, unaware of the eyes that watched from the tree line, slipped away into the night, leaving Kalen with a storm of conflicting emotions. Fear, awe, anger, and an unfamiliar ache of longing twisted inside him, sharp and undeniable. He could no longer dismiss her as weak or powerless. The moon disappeared behind a cloud, and with it, the village returned to silence. But Kalen remained on the outskirts, cloaked in shadow, staring after her retreating figure. Somewhere in the darkness, the figure in the trees moved closer, unseen, plotting. And the Alpha King, for all his strength, knew that this night was only the beginning. The city slept under a blanket of mist, unaware that its fate rested in the hands of a silent healer and the Alpha King who despised her. The night whispered of danger, of secrets, and of the strange, undeniable power of compassion, a power that could heal kingdoms or destroy them, depending on who controlled it. And in the heart of the forest, Lysara paused for a moment, listening to the wind through the trees. She had done what she had come to do. She had saved lives, yet she felt the shadow of Kalen's gaze still upon her and the presence of the stranger in the darkness. She did not yet know which threat would reach her first, or whether the Alpha King who despised her would become the one she needed most. The night held its breath, and the kingdom of Verrat waited for the dawn, unaware that change had already begun. The dawn rose slowly over the kingdom of Verrat, casting a pale gold across the jagged rooftops of the capital. Mist still clung to the cobblestones, curling like smoke from long-forgotten fires. Inside the great fortress, Kalen sat alone in the council hall, his gaze fixed on the darkened streets below. He could still see the faint traces of Lysara's footsteps through the mud, the path she had taken last night to reach the plague-stricken village. Something inside him churned, a confusion he could not name. She had defied him, risked his wrath, yet in doing so she had shown a strength he could not ignore. Kalen clenched his fists. Strength, that was all that mattered to him. And yet Lysara's quiet power, the way she moved, the way she healed, the way she put others before herself, was something entirely different from the strength he had always known. The captain of the guard approached cautiously. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing slightly. "The villagers speak of miracles. They say the Silent One has saved them. We should send a guard to thank her." Kalen's jaw tightened. "No, she acts without permission. No one is to approach her or they will face my judgment." Do you understand?" "Yes, sire," the captain replied, though he did not meet Kalen's gaze. Even he felt the strange awe in the people's whispers. Lysara had become more than a healer, she had become a symbol of hope. Kalen rose from his seat and strode to the window, the cold wind brushing against his face. His mind replayed the image of her kneeling over the fevered child, her hands glowing softly in the moonlight. He could not deny it. She had a power that rivaled his own. And yet he could not bring himself to punish her, not after seeing what she had done. Meanwhile, Lysara returned to the castle in the quiet hours before the sun rose. Her cloak, damp from the river crossing, clung to her shoulders. She moved silently through the halls, careful not to wake the guards or the servants. Even in the palace, she remained invisible, unnoticed, yet essential. She entered her chambers and knelt beside a small brazier, letting out a sigh she could not speak aloud. The burden of her gift was heavy. Healing required energy, and every life she saved drew a piece of herself. Still, she would not stop. Not for Kalen, not for the council, not for anyone who did not understand the quiet fire within her. Her thoughts drifted to Kalen. He had followed her last night, though she had not known it. She had sensed his presence, the silent weight of his eyes upon her, and something deep in her chest had stirred. Fear, yes, but also a strange hope she could not name. Could the Alpha King who despised her truly understand what she did, or would he see only defiance? She did not have long to ponder. A faint knock at her door startled her. She rose carefully, moving to open it, only to see a messenger bowing low with a sealed scroll. The wax bore the mark of the palace council. "It is from the Alpha King," the messenger said softly. "He requests your presence in the garden at dawn." Lysara's heart quickened, though she could not speak it aloud. To be summoned by Kalen was no small matter. The garden was a place of formality, a place where rulers and warriors met to discuss matters of state. She had never been called there before. The sun had just begun to rise when Lysara stepped into the garden, her cloak drawn tight around her shoulders. Kalen was already there, his armor dark in the morning light, his expression unreadable. He did not speak at first. He simply watched her approach, the wind stirring strands of her hair across her face. "You saved lives last night," he said finally, his voice low but carrying across the stone garden. "And yet you disobeyed me." Lysara lowered her head, acknowledging his words without answering. Her silence was both a shield and a statement. She could not explain herself with words, but her actions had already spoken. Kalen's gaze softened, though only slightly. "Do you understand what you risked? The lives of my people are my command. Defying me is treason." She lifted her eyes to his, steady and unwavering. In her gaze was no fear, only resolve. Kalen felt something stir deep inside him, a mixture of admiration, frustration, and a new, unfamiliar tension he could not name. "You have power," he said, pacing slowly before her. "A power I cannot ignore. Yet you hide it, using it in secret. Why?" Her hands rose slightly, moving in the way she had always used to speak. To heal, to calm, to show intention. Kalen watched closely, trying to read the unspoken answer. She did not speak, yet her presence was louder than any words. She acted because she could not do otherwise. She cared for the people because her heart demanded it. And she cared for the kingdom, even if the Alpha King despised her. Kalen's chest tightened. He realized with a pang he did not expect that he had underestimated her entirely. Her silence was not weakness. It was focus, discipline, and courage. She moved with purpose, unbound by pride or fear, guided only by what was right. Before he could speak again, a sudden commotion arose from the palace gates. Guards rushed past, shouting warnings. Lysara's eyes flicked toward the sound, and Kalen followed instinctively. A group of villagers, some injured, some terrified, had arrived at the gates, seeking aid. Kalen's first instinct was to command them away, to assert his authority. Yet when he saw the fear in their eyes, the desperation, something in him shifted. He looked at Lysara, silent but ready, and he understood. She would help them, and he could not stop her. Together they moved through the courtyard. Lysara's hands glowed faintly as she healed cuts, soothed bruises, and calmed the trembling villagers. Kalen stayed close, offering protection but also observing. He watched her work, felt the way her energy flowed around the wounded, and for the first time he questioned what it meant to be strong. Was it simply power? Or was it mercy, compassion, and the courage to act even when others feared? The villagers whispered among themselves. "The silent healer, the Alpha King's mate, she is a gift from the gods." They're all carried across the courtyard, and Kalen felt the stirrings of unease. He had always ruled through fear. And yet here was someone whose quiet strength commanded respect without a single harsh word. As the last of the injured were tended to, Lysara stepped back, her hands still glowing faintly with the energy of healing. She looked to Kalen, waiting, uncertain what his reaction would be. He approached her slowly, his expression conflicted. "You have saved lives that I could not," he said quietly. "And in doing so, you have shown me something I cannot ignore." His words faltered, as if admitting them aloud carried weight he had never faced before. Lysara did not respond with words. She only lowered her gaze, letting the truth of her actions speak for her. Kalen's hands clenched at his sides. Anger, fear, and admiration battled within him. He wanted to scold her, to assert his authority, yet he could not. Not after seeing what she had done. Not after realizing that her silent courage had the power to move hearts, and perhaps even kings. A sudden movement caught his attention. From the shadows of the garden, he saw a figure watching them. Hidden behind the stone walls, a stranger observed Lysara's work with keen interest. Their presence was deliberate, silent, and full of intent. Kalen's instincts flared. Danger was near. He stepped in front of Lysara instinctively, positioning himself between her and the observer. The stranger did not retreat. Instead, they vanished into the shadows, leaving a lingering sense of threat. Kalen's jaw tightened. Whoever that was, they had been watching her, waiting, and he knew, without knowing why, that their intentions were far from innocent. Lysara sensed the disturbance, her hands rising slightly as if to shield herself. Kalen glanced at her, noting the way her posture remained calm despite the threat. She was unafraid, and he for the first time realized that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered. "You are not safe," he said finally, his voice low, almost protective. "Not here. Not anywhere, and I cannot allow anyone to harm you." She met his gaze, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that softened the hard lines of his own. Trust, understanding, something fragile and strong all at once. He wanted to speak, to tell her she was safe, yet the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain feelings that even he did not fully comprehend? The wind stirred through the garden, carrying the scent of the forest and the faint smoke from the brazier. Kalen remained close to Lysara, both aware of the danger that lingered and the bond that had begun to form between them. It was a quiet tension, filled with questions neither could answer, and yet undeniable in its presence. As the villagers were guided safely back to their homes, Kalen and Lysara lingered in the garden, the morning sun breaking through the clouds. The air was heavy with unspoken truths, with emotions neither had named. The kingdom of Verrat waited, unaware that the bond between its alpha king and his silent mate had shifted in a single night. But even as the first rays of sunlight touched the stone walls, Kalen could not ignore the shadow that remained. The stranger had not disappeared. They were still out there, waiting, watching, plotting. And the alpha king, who had despised his silent mate, now realized that protecting her might demand more than strength. It might demand trust, courage, and a heart he had never fully opened. The garden fell silent, save for the whisper of the wind through the leaves. Lysara's hands remained at her sides, her energy still warm from the lives she had saved. Kalen's eyes followed her, filled with thoughts he could not speak aloud. And in that quiet, both of them understood a single truth. The night had changed everything, and the dawn had only just begun. The kingdom of Verrat was restless. The streets of the capital hummed with murmurs of fear, excitement, and whispered rumors. Kalen, the Alpha King, had spent the day brooding over the strange events of the previous night. His silent mate, Lysara, had saved the lives of villagers without permission, and yet he could not deny the truth. She had done what he could not. He had never felt admiration for anyone like this before. His council had tried to persuade him to control her, to punish her, or at least contain her influence. But Kalen's thoughts kept returning to her quiet strength, the unspoken courage in her eyes, and the steady resolve in her hands. He could not command it, could not restrain it, and the realization stirred an unfamiliar ache in his chest. Meanwhile, Lysara moved through the palace like a shadow. The palace corridors were quiet now, and she slipped past guards unnoticed. She carried with her a small satchel of herbs and salves, prepared to tend to the people in secret. Her work was never-ending. The sick, the wounded, the desperate, all sought her aid and all found it in her hands. Yet she did not seek praise or reward. Her voice might be silent, but her heart spoke in every action. Kalen observed her from the shadowed balcony, hidden from her sight. He followed her movements like a hawk, though he told himself it was duty rather than curiosity. Still, he could not look away. He saw the villagers approach her, hope shining in their eyes. He watched as she healed a man with a deep cut across his arm, her hands glowing faintly as she pressed them to the wound. The man gasped as the pain eased, his eyes filling with tears of gratitude. Kalen's chest tightened. He had ruled Verrat with fear and strength, believing that power alone maintained order. Yet here was a power far different, quiet, unseen, and yet undeniable. He realized that Lysara's strength was not in her ability to wield force, but in her ability to inspire, to heal, to give hope where none remained. He stepped forward, almost revealing himself, but stopped. He could not yet face her openly. There was too much unresolved tension, too much pride and stubbornness on both sides. And so he watched, silent and conflicted, as Lysara moved among the villagers. Hours passed, and Lysara's work continued. She did not notice Kalen's gaze, nor did she feel the presence of the stranger who had followed her last night. The figure moved in the shadows beyond the village, silent and calculating, waiting for the moment to strike. Kalen sensed it before he saw it, the subtle shift in the air, the faint rustle of leaves. His instincts flared. Danger was near. He moved swiftly, intercepting the figure before it could reach Lysara. A young man cloaked in black stepped from the shadows, his hands empty but his intent clear. Kalen's eyes narrowed. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice low and commanding. The man said nothing, only smirked before vanishing into the trees. Kalen's fists clenched. He knew that threat was only the beginning. Whoever was behind this had been watching Lysara, waiting, and now they were testing him. Lysara finished her work with the last of the injured villagers and turned toward the palace, weary but unbroken. She had healed all she could, but the weight of the people's suffering still rested on her shoulders. Kalen met her at the edge of the village, stepping out from the shadows, his presence imposing. "You are not safe," he said, his voice heavy with warning. "They are watching you. I will not allow harm to come to you." She met his gaze, steady and unwavering, as if to say she understood. Words were not necessary between them. They had begun to communicate in the quiet language of shared purpose and silent understanding. The Alpha King led her back to the palace, moving through the corridors with precision, ensuring no one followed. The weight of his thoughts pressed on him. He could not allow danger to come to her. He had always ruled with fear, but fear was not enough to protect someone like Lysara. Protection required trust, courage, and strength of a different kind, qualities he was only beginning to understand. In the council hall, Kalen convened a secret meeting. Only the closest of his advisors were present, their expressions wary as they listened to his words. "There is a threat," he said, his voice firm. "Someone watches Lysara. Someone seeks to use her gift against us. I will not allow it." The council murmured among themselves, unsure how to respond. Lysara's powers were not fully understood, even by them. Some feared her gift, others doubted its importance. Kalen silenced them with a look. "Do not underestimate her. She has already saved lives that I could not. And she will be the key to defending this kingdom." Meanwhile, Lysara returned to her chambers, her hands still warm from healing. She felt the pull of Kalen's presence in her mind, the unspoken acknowledgement that he was beginning to see her differently. She did not speak of it, she could not. Her voice had been taken from her long ago, leaving only her actions to convey meaning. The days that followed were tense. Kalen remained close, shadowing her movements, guarding her without suffocating her. He struggled with his own pride, torn between the need to protect and the desire to assert authority. Lysara, in turn, felt the weight of his gaze, sensing both his admiration and his frustration. Their bond deepened in silence, each learning the unspoken rhythms of the other. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Lysara tended to a child stricken with a sudden illness. Kalen watched from the doorway, his heart tightening at the child's cries. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder to steady him. Lysara's hands glowed faintly as she worked, and Kalen felt a strange warmth spread through him. "You have power," he said quietly, almost to himself, "and yet you wield it with more care than I have ever seen in my life." Lysara looked up, her eyes meeting his. In that silent exchange, Kalen felt a shift, a recognition that went beyond words. She trusted him to witness her gift without fear. He realized that he trusted her too, not with his life, but with something far deeper. The moment was broken by a sudden shout from the palace gates. Kalen's instincts flared again. He moved quickly, drawing Lysara behind him. A group of men had infiltrated the outer walls, seeking to steal what they did not understand. Kalen's warriors rushed to intercept them, but Kalen and Lysara found themselves at the center of the chaos. Lysara's hands glowed brightly, her energy flowing outward to calm the injured and protect the innocent. Kalen fought beside her, his strength unmatched, but he relied on her guidance more than he admitted. Together, they formed an unspoken alliance, blending force and compassion in a way neither had done before. As the last intruder fled, Kalen turned to Lysara, his chest heaving from exertion and emotion. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "And yet His words faltered, the weight of his feelings pressing against him. Lysara only looked at him, patient and steady. She did not speak, and yet her presence offered reassurance. Kalen realized that this silence, once a source of frustration, had become a bridge between them. In their quiet moments, they understood each other more deeply than words could ever convey. The threat outside the walls had been repelled, but the danger remained. Kalen knew that whoever had sent the men would return, and that their interest in Lysara was far from over. He also knew that he could no longer dismiss his own feelings, nor could he ignore the bond forming between them. That night, as the palace settled into uneasy quiet, Kalen stood on the balcony, looking out over the city. Lysara sat beside the brazier in her chambers, her hands folded in her lap. He wanted to speak, to tell her that she had changed him, that her courage and compassion had touched him in ways he could not name. But the words remained unspoken, trapped by pride and fear. Instead, he watched. He watched as she moved with grace and purpose, as she healed and comforted, as she shone with a quiet power that no darkness could dim. And in that watching, he realized that he had begun to see her not as silent or weak, but as vital, strong, and necessary. A sudden movement in the shadowed hall caught his attention. The stranger, the one who had observed her in the village, was near again, hidden but persistent. Kalen's heart tightened. He had thought the danger behind them, but it was only beginning. Whoever sought Lysara's gift was patient, cunning, and dangerous. Kalen moved toward her chambers, determined to ensure her safety. He did not know what awaited them, only that he could not let harm come to her. As he entered the corridor, he saw Lysara rise, sensing his approach. Their eyes met, and in that gaze both understood the unspoken truth. Together they were stronger than any threat, yet the path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges neither had faced before. The night carried its tension into the castle halls, the wind whispering of danger, courage, and the growing bond between an alpha king and his silent mate. And in the heart of Verrath, both Kalen and Lysara understood that their story was only beginning, that their shared destiny would be tested, and that the power of trust, courage, and quiet strength could shape the fate of a kingdom. The kingdom of Verrath slept under a blanket of mist and moonlight. The castle walls glimmered faintly, silent except for the occasional rustle of guards or the distant howl of a lone wolf in the forests beyond. But within those walls, tension crackled like lightning waiting to strike. Kalen, the Alpha King, paced in the council hall, his mind restless. Lysara's presence haunted him, not in a way that troubled him, but in a way that unsettled his pride, his fears, and the cold fortress he had built around his heart. She had grown stronger with every day, her hands saving lives, her courage inspiring hope where there had been none. And now, the threat that had lurked in the shadows was moving closer. Kalen knew it, and he feared not only for his kingdom but for her. "Prepare the gates," he commanded, his voice calm but urgent. "Every soldier must be ready, and Lysara—" His lips parted, but he struggled to find words. "She stays close to me, no one touches her." The council members exchanged nervous glances. Kalen rarely revealed emotion, and even more rarely did he issue orders with such personal intensity. But tonight was different. Lysara was no longer just a mate in name, a silent shadow at his side. She was his partner, his equal in strength, and his heart refused to let her face danger alone. Meanwhile, Lysara prepared quietly in her chambers. The night was still, but her senses were alert. She had felt the shadow approaching, the presence that had stalked her since the village incident. Whoever it was, they sought her gift, and yet she did not tremble. Courage was a language she had learned to speak with her actions, and tonight her actions would define the fate of the kingdom. When Kalen arrived at her door, she looked up, her eyes steady and unflinching. No words passed between them. The understanding was complete. They would face whatever came together. The Alpha King and his silent mate, two halves of a whole bound by destiny, trust, and the unspoken language of courage. The castle gates shook as the intruders struck. Shadows moved quickly, attempting to breach the outer walls with stealth and cunning. Kalen drew his sword, its steel glinting in the pale moonlight, and moved with precision, each step controlled, each motion deadly. Lysara followed, her hands glowing faintly, a shield of healing energy forming around the soldiers and guards. Her gift no longer whispered in secret. It radiated, protecting, mending, and fortifying those she loved. Together, they moved through the chaos like a single force. Kalen's strength met every attack, his blade slicing through darkness, while Lysara's energy flowed into the wounded, easing pain and granting them the courage to continue. They did not speak. There was no need. Their actions, perfectly synchronized, told a story of unity, trust, and unmatched power. At the heart of the courtyard, the leader of the intruders emerged, a figure cloaked in darkness with eyes like cold fire. Kalen stepped forward, his sword raised. "You will harm no one," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Leave this place or face the consequences." The figure laughed, a sound that sent chills through the night. "You are brave, Alpha King, but your silent mate is the prize. Hand her over and perhaps your people will survive." Kalen's eyes burned with fury. "I will never surrender her, not to you, not to anyone." His hand tightened on the sword. He realized fully that Lysara's life, her gift, and her very presence were intertwined with the kingdom's fate. And with that understanding came a surge of devotion he had never known. Lysara stepped beside him, her hands glowing brighter than ever. She did not speak, yet Kalen felt her courage as clearly as if she had whispered it into his ear. Together they advanced, a living force of strength and compassion, a bond unbreakable. The intruders attacked, shadows swirling like smoke around them. Kalen fought with precision and raw power, cutting through the darkness, protecting Lysara at every turn. Lysara's energy radiated outward, calming the intruders' allies, soothing the wounded, and binding the cracks in the castle walls that had been damaged in the assault. The attackers were skilled, but they had not anticipated this. They had not anticipated the unity of a king and his silent mate, the balance of strength and mercy. As the battle reached its peak, Kalen found himself face to face with the leader. Steel met shadow and sparks flew from the clash. Kalen's strength was unmatched, yet the leader was cunning and relentless. Just as the strike came that could have ended Kalen, Lysara's hands rose, her energy flaring in a brilliant pulse that threw the assailant back. The attack failed, and Kalen seized the moment, disarming the intruder and forcing him to retreat. The courtyard fell silent. The intruders had fled, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of their defeat. Soldiers and villagers alike stared in awe at Lysara, her hands still glowing softly as she moved among the injured, healing them as if nothing had happened. Kalen lowered his sword, chest heaving, and for the first time he looked at her not as a silent mate, but as a partner, a force equal to his own. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly. Words that would have been impossible months ago now came freely, carrying admiration, gratitude, and something deeper that he could no longer deny. Lysara's gaze softened. She did not speak, but the quiet understanding passed between them was stronger than any words. They had faced danger together, survived, and emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as a team bound by trust and courage. The palace guards and council members gathered, bowing in respect and awe. Kalen's voice, once cold and unyielding, now carried warmth and authority of a different kind. "The kingdom is safe," he said. "Because of her, because of us, and we will not allow fear to rule this land. Strength is more than power. Strength is compassion, courage, and the willingness to stand together." The council nodded, some surprised, others hesitant, but none could deny the truth. Lysara's gift, Kalen's leadership, and their united courage had turned the tide. A new chapter for Verrat had begun. As the night faded and dawn broke, Kalen and Lysara stood atop the castle walls. The sun rose over the jagged mountains, casting light across the city that had survived darkness. Lysara's hands rested lightly in his, a silent affirmation of trust and connection. Kalen's heart, once guarded and hardened, felt warmth he had never known. "You are no longer silent to me," Kalen whispered. "Not in spirit, not in strength. You have changed me, and I I cannot imagine this kingdom without you by my side." Lysara's eyes met his, steady and calm. No words were needed. She had always communicated through action, and now their bond was complete, silent, strong, and unbreakable. The threat from the shadows had passed for now, but Kaelin knew that their journey was not over. The kingdom would face challenges, enemies, and forces that neither could anticipate. Yet together, they had discovered a truth far greater than fear or power. Unity, trust, and courage could overcome even the darkest nights. Kaelin drew her close, resting his hand on her shoulder, feeling the quiet rhythm of her heart, steady and strong. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together, you and I always." Lysara nodded slightly, a faint, serene smile touching her lips. She had found her place, not just beside the Alpha King, but in the kingdom, in the hearts of the people, and in a love that had grown quietly, persistently, through every challenge. The kingdom of Verrath watched as its Alpha King and his silent mate stood together, the first light of dawn painting them in gold. The legend of their courage, their bond, and the power of compassion would ripple through the kingdom for generations. And though danger might rise again, the Alpha King and his silent mate were ready, bound by trust, strength, and the unspoken promise of love that transcended fear and pride. And in the quiet of the castle, a faint glow on Lysara's hand shimmered, a reminder that her gift was alive, powerful, and a force that could shape the future. Kaelin saw it, understood it, and without words pledged himself to her, to the kingdom, and to the path they would walk together. The mist lifted from the streets, and the people of Verrath began their day, unaware of the silent battles fought in the shadows, unaware of the courage and love that now protected them. But the Alpha King and his mate knew. And together, they would ensure that the light of hope, healing, and unity would shine brighter than any darkness that threatened their land.